Hi, my name is Brittany, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a really basic sketchbook or journal using a pamphlet stitch and materials that you might have lying around your house. We're going to start by getting all of our materials together. So we're going to need some blank paper, computer paper or notebook paper is fine, cardstock or construction paper that you'll want to use for the cover of your book. If you don't have cardstock or construction paper, a couple other things that you might have that could be useful are a paper bag. You'll see one of my demo books, I used a paper bag that I opened and cut up, or you could use a file folder. For our journal today, I'm going to show you using cardstock. We'll also need scissors, a ruler, a pushpin, a pencil, a bookbinding or tapestry needle if you have one. If you don't, it's not necessary for this stitch in this book. And then we're also going to be using dental floss today to stitch our books together. So the first thing that we're going to do is start folding our paper for our signature and our cover. So you're just going to take your computer paper or notebook paper and fold it individually one sheet at a time and make a nice crease in the middle. You can use your fingernail, the back of your scissors, or the edge of your ruler to make that crease. And you want to crease each page, fold and crease each page individually. Don't stack them all inside of each other and try to fold them all at once. For our books today, since we're just learning, I'm going to suggest using 5 or 6 pages folded in half, and that's going to give you 10 to 12 final pages in your notebook or your sketchbook. If you're overly ambitious, it can be kind of tough with a lot of pages when you're first getting started. Once you've folded each of your pages, we're going to start nesting them inside of each other to create what's called a signature. And our book today is only going to have one signature with 10 final pages in it. But if you really get excited by bookbinding, you can look online and there are lots of tutorials for creating books that have multiple signatures that have really intricate bindings, sewing all of them together. And if you're interested in the history of bookmaking, you'll find that there are lots of really cool resources out there that show you how to make multiple signature books and intricate bindings. And those are usually actually covered up, so you don't get to see them unless you're making them. Once you've folded and nested all of your pages together to create your signature, we're going to lay that inside the cover as well. If you have binder clips or paper clips, this is a good time to just take one and from the center of your book, kind of clip them together. And this will help keep everything together as we're measuring and sewing later on. Next, we're going to measure and mark 3 stations or holes for sewing the binding. So opening up your signature and laying it flat on the table in front of you, take your ruler and along the center inside spine of your book, you're going to measure and mark 3 different places where we're going to poke holes or sewing stations. If you like them to be precise, you can measure and make sure that they're all evenly spaced, or if you're like me, you can just eyeball it a little bit. I suggest making sure that the end stations are about 1 inch in from the edge of your book cover. So that way you're not poking holes and sewing too close to the edge of the final book. So here you'll see 3 fairly evenly spaced marked sewing stations. And next we're going to poke the holes in those stations. So we're going to use a push pin now, and from the center of your book, if you're holding it open, just take your push pin and poke holes at each of those spaces that you marked, just along the spine of your book, pushing gently from the inside to the outside. And you want to wiggle your push pin around just a little bit so that the hole is nice and easy when we're getting to the later steps where we're sewing through those stations. Again, if you don't have a tapestry needle or bookbinding needle, it's also really important now to make the holes along the spine big enough that they'll be easy to push the dental floss through. And so carefully from the center of the book, we're going to make holes along the spine at each of those marked sewing stations. All right, Next, we're going to measure and cut our dental floss. Dental floss is perfect for binding books, and it's something that a lot of people have around the house. If you have waxed thread for bookbinding, you can use that as well, but dental floss is the perfect width. It's also lightly waxed, so it's not going to cut or tear the edges of the pages as we're sewing, and it's also firm enough if you don't have a tapestry needle or a bookbinding needle, it will easily glide through those holes that we just poked with a push pin. A good rule of thumb for measuring the length of whatever thread you're using for sewing is to measure 3 times the length of the binding. So I'm just kind of holding my floss along the edge of my book and pulling it 1, 2, 3 lengths of the binding or the spine of the book. And then I'm just going to cut it with my scissors. Now we're going to thread our tapestry needle or our bookbinding needle and get ready to start stitching our journals together. Here we're going to really easily thread the needle and leave a little tail. And we're going to start sewing from the inside at that center station in the middle of our book. So taking your needle in one hand and holding your book in the other, you're just going to take your needle through that center station, exit along the spine, and go ahead and pull the needle through. We have plenty of extra thread, so what I'm also going to do is leave 5 or 6 inches, enough so that I can hold on to it as I'm stitching along the spine of the book. That way I don't wind up pulling the thread all the way through as I'm sewing. So now, from the outside of our journal, we're going to take our threaded needle and we're going to enter through one of those top sewing stations. So just along the spine of your journal, taking your needle and heading back in towards the center of the book. And again, pulling it taut. And this is where it's helpful if you have enough thread or floss to leave a little tail. You can hold on to that as you're gently pulling taut on the needle in your hand. Now, we're going to take our thread, we're going to skip over that center station, and instead we're going to exit from the center of our book at the bottom sewing station. So here I am poking through and coming out on the exterior spine at the bottom of the book. Again, gently pulling it taut, and if you're holding it in your other hand, you can hold that tail and make sure you don't pull the thread all the way through the book. All right, and one of the final steps is from the exterior of your book along the spine. Go ahead and go back in through that center sewing station, back into the center inside of your book. And you can gently pull it taut. There you go. All right, now we're going to get ready and tie the floss and finish off the binding. So this is where it's important to make sure that either side, either end of your floss is sort of straddling that middle thread. So here you can see along the center spine of my book, I have one side of each of the pieces of floss on either side of that thread that runs down the center spine. And we're just going to take the thread, pull it taut gently, and tie a couple of knots. They don't have to be anything fancy, as long as they are on either side of that thread that's going down the center spine of the book. It's going to help tie it off for us. So I just made 3 or 4 little knots, gently pulled it, and now I can take my scissors and cut the excess thread. There you have it, a super simple pamphlet stitch for you to enjoy.